hardship, I'm going to talk about knowledge first, okay?
Sure.
So you believe you might know something about this case, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Is that based on things that you may have read or seen in the news?
I actually heard on the radio the day before I came in for jury duty. I was in the car with my dad, and we kind of laughed about it because I almost figured this was the case where I was going to be, picked on. So, yeah, I heard the details of the case on the radio on Wednesday. Do you want me to go into detail on what I heard, or?
No, in a minute I may. I just kind of want to focus on a couple of things. I may circle back to that. Other than hearing about the case on the radio, did you read anything about the case or see anything related to the case on television?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So you heard something on the radio, and when you said yes, was that you read or you saw?
I saw on the television, I think it was, can't recall, it was probably a few weeks ago, and that's how I recognized the defendant.
Okay. And you say a few weeks ago, in the last couple of days, have you seen anything on the television or read anything about the case?
No, just what I heard on the radio.
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, you saw some things on the television, you heard some things on the radio. Let me ask this first. Based on what you heard or what you viewed, have you reached any conclusions about the case at this point?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay, when you say somewhat, that means there is some conclusion you've reached. So tell me, what conclusion have you reached?
Well, I was leaning more towards, the way the media was advertising, it sounded more towards guilty.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. What we're going to do is we are going to release you from jury service in this case. You do not have to come back on Monday. All you have to do is turn that juror badge in on the first floor where you started this morning.
Okay.
Please do not discuss anything with the other potential jurors.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Juror 4-6.
Ms. Clark, if you could just come forward. We got that standing mic. If you could just use that microphone, please. Counsel, you may be seated. Okay, ma'am, I believe you indicated you knew something about the case and also you want to speak to me about a hardship. I'm going to start with your knowledge about the case.
Well, I have been a regular news watcher for everything. It's been a very newsy year, so we stay glued to the news.
It has been a very
So
newsy
I've
year.
heard quite a bit in the news. I have not watched the cop show, but I have watched everything else.
Okay, so you've seen it on television?
Yes.
Okay. Before I get into specifically what you have seen, preliminary question I have for you is, have you reached any conclusions about the case based on what you've seen?
I'm a very opinionated lady.
Okay. So
I
you reached
feel that our
opinions.
justice system, our judicial system is the backbone of this country. It's a foundation. I feel that she was accused of a crime. She was tried by a jury of her peers. She was convicted and sentenced. It will take a lot to make me change my mind and overturn what that happened.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. We're going to go ahead and release you from jury service in this case. You will not need to come back on Monday. All you have to do is turn in that juror badge on the first floor where you started this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Do not discuss anything about this case with the other potential jurors, but you're discharged.
Okay, thank you.
Juror 4-7.
Mr. Campo, if you could just come forward to this microphone right here, standing there, and counsel, you may be seated. All right, Mr. Campo, I believe you did not raise your hand about knowing something about the case, but you want to talk to me about hardship. Is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you tell me about your hardship?
Medical appointments next week at the VA. One on Tuesday, I could rearrange that one, but the one on Wednesday, I have 4 medical appointments there, which I can change. I already have appointments, a list of appointments with me for January and February. So these appointments on Wednesday are very important because I had a total knee replacement and I have an MRI, X-rays, and other examinations that they want to do on Wednesday. So it's taken, with the VA, it takes quite a while for you to get appointments. Now, I have a list in my pocket in case anybody wants to look at them.
No, you're just telling me what your issues are, fine. I'm going to go ahead and grant you hardship based on medical needs. So you won't have to come back next week. We're going to release you. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn in your juror badge. Please don't discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out, but you are released.
All right, thank you.
Juror 48.
Ms. Blanco, if you could just come to this microphone right here. Hey, Neil, before you go, would you close those blinds back there? I'm staring straight out. I'm trying to speak with people, and I'm being blind. Counsel, you may be seated. Ms. Blanco, I think you indicated that you know something about the case or may know something about the case. Is that right?
True.
True. Okay. And is that based on things you may have read or heard in the news?
In the past.
In the past. When you say in the past, how long ago would that be?
When it occurred years ago?
Years ago. Okay. Have you read or heard anything about the case recently?
No.
All right. So let's talk about, for just a moment, the things that you heard in the past. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that, and we may need to get into the details, we may not.
Okay.
Based on what you either read or heard in the past about the case, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No.
Okay. Do you have any, based on what you may have read or heard in the past, have you any opinions about the case?
No.
Do you have any preconceived notions about the case?
No.
All right. With respect to the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito, do you have, based on what you saw in the past, any preconceived notions, conclusions, opinions, one way or the other, concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito in this case?
No, because I didn't pay that closely attention to it.
Okay.
So I would say no.
Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. One more question before I get there, though. If you're selected for jury service in this case, what you're going to be required to do is decide this case based on the evidence, and only the evidence is presented in this courtroom and the law that I instruct you on. In other words, anything you may have seen or heard about this case in the past must be set aside, and you have to decide the case only based on what you hear and see in the courtroom, that is, the evidence. Can you do that?
I think so.
Okay, when you say "I think so," there's a little bit of ambiguity in
Yes.
that response.
Okay. Yes.
And I don't want to suggest
Yes,
that you
no.
have to answer it one way or the other.
Right.
It's just if there's ambiguity, we need to know. If there's no ambiguity. So are you saying you can do that?
I can.
Okay, you can do that. Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit about what you saw or heard or read originally. And you said it was in the past, and so I'm assuming what you mean, and if I'm wrong, you tell me I'm wrong. I'm assuming what you meant is around about the time that the alleged acts occurred or alleged events occurred, that's when you heard or read about the case. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. What do you recall specifically, if anything, that you either heard, saw, or read?
I remember seeing on TV the news about what happened pretty much when she got arrested, what the implications were, and you know how I guess she tried to pay somebody to, at that time, I guess so-called kill her husband, and there was a so-called undercover cop.
Okay, do you recall anything specific in terms of videos or anything like that that you saw in connection with the reporting of the case?
No.
Okay, but what you've just told me is this kind of thumbnail sketch you've given me of what you recall.
Mm-hmm.
Did that impact you or affect you in any way? Did you have any opinions that arose out of that when you heard it?
Not really, because I didn't think about, it didn't hit close to home, it didn't hit me, so it's like when you pass by the news, it's like everything that goes by the news is like, I hate to say it, but I don't watch the news a lot, I just happen to watch it that day, And I just try to kind of stay away because everything that comes out of the news, most of the time, it's negative. So it's like, I kind of try not to watch it. As often as I could stay away from the TV, I will.
So it didn't have any particular impact on you when you saw it? Okay. Let me give the attorneys an opportunity to ask some follow-up questions. We'll start with the state. Okay, Mr. Claypool?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Blanca. How many TV clips did you see regarding Dalia?
I don't recall exactly. Like I said, I don't watch that much TV. It might have been during that week or so, a couple times during the news. If I was cooking, I had it on in front of me. So I don't, I really can't give you an exact number. That happened a while ago, so.
More than once?
I would say probably yes.
Okay. And in viewing the video clips of Ms. Dippolito, did you learn anything about what happened after she was arrested?
No, I didn't know anything. I really didn't. I didn't keep up with it.
All right, thank you. Have you heard any radio broadcasts about Dalia?
No, I usually listen to my country stations, and I didn't hear anything. Yeah, I didn't listen
Keith
to.
Urban fan?
Yes.
Very good. Has anything you've seen regarding Ms. Dippolito, when you first saw the TV clips, did you feel any way like, hey, maybe she did do this?
No, no.
All right, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, ma'am, we're going to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30. When you come back, what you'll do is you'll report to the jury assembly room by 9:30 downstairs. They'll tell you when to come up. I'll remind you of things I said both yesterday and earlier today. Please do not communicate with anyone about this case. Please do not do any research about this case. And please do not listen to or read any news accounts of this trial. Have a pleasant weekend. We'll see you back
Okay.
on Monday.
You too. Thank you.
Juror 49.
Ms. Palmieri, if you just come up to that microphone right there. Counsel, you may be seated. I believe you indicated you knew something about the case, but you also want to speak to me about hardship also. Let me start with your knowledge of the case. Do you believe you know something about the case based on things you may have seen or read in the news?
Well, I did follow it in the newspaper, on TV, and then I did watch the episode of Cops.
Okay, so you've both read about it, seen about it in news coverage, and actually seen the television show Cops, which addressed it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, based on your reading, reviewing news coverage, and your watching of the television show Cops, have you reached any opinions about this case?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and what opinion is that?
I just feel that she was guilty.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. We are going to excuse you from jury service in this case. You're not going to have to come back. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn that badge in to the jury assembly room where you started on the first floor. Please do me a favor and do not discuss anything with the other potential jurors on the way out. Thank you.
Juror 410.
Mr. Azami, you can come right to this microphone. Counsel, you may be seated. I believe you did not raise your hand that you knew anything about the case, but you wanted to speak to me about hardship. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about your hardship.
Well, actually, I just got back from overseas. Stayed there longer than I expected. Spent all my money. So now I'm just starting from scratch, basically from zero. Got a new job, got a car.
Where do you work?
I work at a restaurant. I work as a server. That's the problem.
Oh, so you get paid
I
by
have to
tips.
be there to make the tips, yeah.
Okay, so
Even if they pay me hourly, that's
it's basically
$3,
minimum wage,
that's-
right?
that's-
Okay, actually below minimum wage, I believe. Okay, so do you work during the day or only at night?
from 10 to 10.
From 10 to 10, okay. So
Right.
it may sound like a silly question, but if you're not able to work over the next week or so, is that going to be a significant financial hardship for you?
For the next week, yes, because by the end of the week, I have 2 bills that I have to take care of, and that's, one of them is my car.
Okay.
If I don't, I'll probably lose it. The other one is the insurance, it's the same thing.
Okay. I'm going to release you for financial hardship. You will not have to come back. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn that juror badge in on the first floor, and please do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out, but you're discharged. You won't have to come back.
Thank you.
Juror 5-1.
Sanchez, just come right up there to that microphone right there. Counsel, you may be seated. I think you're seeing me for 2 reasons. I think you raised your hand that you knew something about the case, and also you want to speak to me about hardship. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to start with knowledge. Do you believe you know something about this case from reading or seeing something on the news?
Yes.
Okay. Recently, in the past, or both?
In the past, just briefly headline, I figured just say so.
Okay, in the past. How far in the past did you see or read something?
A year ago, it was a while ago.
Okay, have you seen or read anything recently about the case?
No.
All right. Based on what you saw or read in the past, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No.
Based on what you saw or read in the past, have you formed any opinions about the case?
No.
And also based on what you may have seen or read in the past, do you have any preconceived notions about the case?
No, not at all.
All right. Based on what you may have seen or read in the past, have you reached any conclusions at all? Do you have any preconceived notions or opinions one way or the other concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito? No. Okay. I didn't get the name out of Ms. Dippolito. Okay. So tell me what you did see in the past specifically.
Just a headline, and what I think it was on the internet, just quickly.
A headline on the internet. Did you see anything on the television about the case?
No.
All right. Did you read anything in the newspaper about the case?
No.
So you saw a headline on the internet. Do you know what website you're on or what?
Just Yahoo.
Okay, so something on
And
Yahoo.
I'm not even sure if it was this case. It just is similar, so I'm not even sure.
Not even sure. Okay. All right. Now, if you were, I'm not sure what you read or saw in terms of the headline on the internet that may relate to this case, but what you would be required to do if you were seated as a juror in this case, you would be required to decide this case based on the evidence and only the evidence that's presented in the courtroom and the law that I instruct you on, disregarding anything you may have seen or read outside of court. Can you do that if you were selected?
Yes.
All right. You also, though, wanted to speak to me about hardship. So can you tell me what your issue is there?
I have a permanent back injury, and I'm on disability, permanent disability. I can't sit for too long, stand for too long, and if it's a short case, I figure I'm here, I could do it, whatever, bite the bullet. But over a long period of time, I don't know if I could be sitting and standing in your courtroom.
Well, let me talk to you about that for a moment, because we, candidly, your condition is a common condition. We have a lot of people that do have back problems. And what I always ask them, because I know these chairs are not very comfortable, the juror chair is a little more comfortable, but these chairs are not very comfortable. Usually, folks with back problems, if they're able to stand, it helps. Is that your case?
Yes, and I can't stand for too long, like I've been standing outside. My back hurts now, and as it progresses the time, it hurts more. If I'm sitting for too long, it depends on the day, position.
So you really, if I understand, you have to kind of get up and down.
Yeah, if I'm more flexible, moving around, stretching, it does help a lot.
Let me ask this. If we're able to accommodate that, in other words, if you're selected, well, first of all, to the extent you have to participate in any further jury selection, if you need to get up and move around, you can do that without asking me. I will know that you have this condition now that you've told me. But really, I want to focus on if you happen to be selected for jury service in this case. You're going to be sitting in this box over here. It's a large box. It's not going to be full. As long as you're able to listen to the evidence, you would be permitted to stand up if necessary, stretch a little bit. You know, you don't want to be distracting, but you could actually Get up, move around a little bit, as long as you're paying attention to what's going on. Sit back down if you want, stand back up if you need to. In other words, we can make certain accommodations that we hopefully would help you. If you were able to do that, in other words, if you were selected, you were able to kind of stand up when you needed to, sit back down when you need to, even move around a little bit. You can't leave the jury box while the trial's going on, but you can move around a little bit as long as you're able to pay attention to the trial. Would that accommodate you enough that you believe that you could sit if necessary for the trial?
That would help, but if my back goes into spasm, it's been times I've been taken away in an ambulance because I would just hit the deck, you know.
No, I understand. How often does that happen?
It happened around 4 months ago.
Okay, so it doesn't happen weekly, but you don't know when it's going to.
It depends. You know, it's one of these things, you know.
Okay.
I could go for days that I feel pretty good, and then it's days that I'm just not mobile at all.
Are you taking any medication for this?
Yes, I'm on Vicodin, Ambien.
Okay.
For my back, and I take it as needed.
Okay. Anything about the medication you're taking which would prevent you from focusing on the case and understanding what's going on and processing that?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give the attorneys an opportunity to ask you some questions. We'll start with the state.
As far as your back pain,
Excuse me?
as far as the back pain, when you have the ability to move around, at any point do you ever find yourself unable to concentrate on what's going on?
Oh, of course.
Is that often that happens, or not very often?
It often, and also it affects, you know, be blunt, you know, urinary tract, you know, I feel like I have to urinate a lot, you know, sometimes like that, it affects me that way too.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Claypool.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Mr. Station.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Good, how are you?
Good, so far.
Remember that you were mentioning the headline you saw in the office?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the title of the headline?
No, it's just something I saw that was familiar, and I think I mentioned it to the judge just to be safe. I don't remember the headline or anything like that. It's something about what's here, you know, what's going on right now, but I don't know who was involved, or I knew it was a man and a woman type thing.
Do you remember specifically what the Yahoo article
No,
said?
no.
Just kind of a follow-up question here on the issue of your back. So I want to make sure I understand. When I mentioned that you could get up and move around, you can, but you'd still have to be focused on the evidence. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, if you got up and moved around and you were doing that, would you be distracted from listening to the evidence? Do you think it's going to be a distraction?
Well, if I'm in that much pain, yes, because, you know, it distracts from what's going on.
Right, I'm not
here.
talking about full spasm, I'm just talking about...
No, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
pain, you know.
Okay.
This
all
is
right.
something you have to concentrate on.
Yeah, I understand. We're going to go ahead and release you for medical hardship in the case. So,
Okay, thank you.
You will not have to come back Monday. All you have to do is turn that juror badge in and go to the first floor to do that. And please don't discuss anything about the case with any of the other potential jurors.
All right, thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Juror 5-2.
Mr. Dembski, if you'll just come down forward to that microphone right there. Counsel, you may be seated. All right, ma'am, I believe you indicated that you thought you knew something about the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that based on things that you may have seen or heard on the news?
Yes.
Okay. Did you read about the case or view something on television about the case, or both?
Both.
Okay. Was that recently, in the past, or both?
In the past.
In the past. Have you read or viewed anything recently about the case?
No.
All right. When you say in the past, approximately how long ago was that?
Maybe 3-4 months.
3 or 4 months. Okay, so this year, but not recently. I mean, recently in the sense of the last couple of weeks, last couple of days. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Let me ask a couple of questions, and I'll come back to what you may have seen or read. Based on what you did see or read, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
Yes.
You have. Okay. What conclusion have you reached at this point?
Guilty.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know people don't want to tell us that because you feel like there's something wrong with telling us your opinion, but that's what we need. That's fine. We appreciate your candor. We're going to go ahead and release you from jury service in this case. You will not have to come back on Monday. All you have to do is turn that juror badge in downstairs. Do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out. Thank you.
Juror 5-3.
Is it Ms. Pacheco? Yes. Okay, if you can come to that microphone right there that's standing, and counsel, you may be seated. Okay, ma'am, I believe you indicated that you think you know something about the case, is that right?
Right.
And is that based on things that you may have read or seen in the news?
Yes.
Okay. Recently or in the past or both?
Both.
Both, okay. Before we get to those things in specifics, based on what you have read or seen on the news, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that conclusion?
I think she's guilty.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to release you from jury service in this case. You do not have to come back. Turn your juror badge in on the first floor where you started. Please don't discuss anything about the case with the other potential jurors.
Juror 5-4.
Ms. Cohen, you can just come up to this microphone right here, this standing microphone in front of you, and counsel, you may be seated. I think you raised your hand indicating that you believe you know something about the case, and you also want to talk to me about hardship. But let me start with knowledge. Do you believe you know something about this case based on things you may have read or heard in the news?
Well, I recall seeing the case shown in the news on the local news websites and on TV for quite a while now.
All right, so you've seen it not just in the last couple days, but also in the past?
In the past, yeah, I've stayed off the local news sites since yesterday.
Right, I understand. You're following my instructions now, but you can't, obviously, you didn't know before that you can't look at the news. So we're just dealing with what happened before you came in tomorrow, or yesterday morning, yesterday morning. So you've seen and you've read things also about the case, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, based on what you have seen or read about the case, have you reached any conclusions about the case? Let me say this, please. Well, no, I'm going to say something first, because people, when I ask that question, they think they're going to say something wrong if they tell me they've reached a conclusion. And I don't want words in your mouth. So you've reached a conclusion, that's fine. You haven't reached a conclusion, that's fine. But understand, there's no right or wrong answers to these questions. It's just truthful answers. People reach conclusions, they don't reach conclusions. And so please don't be shy about sharing those things, okay? So you've seen some things in the news, you've read some things in the news. Based on that, have you reached any conclusions about the case at this point?
Yes, sir. I actually was kind of surprised that it's still an open case. I thought it was already, over. Actually.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and release you from jury service in this case. You're not going to have to come back on Monday. Simply turn your juror badge in downstairs on the first floor and do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Juror entering, 5-5.
Youngblood, if you come up to that microphone, please, and counsel, you may be seated. Mr. Youngblood, I think you indicated, number one, that you believe you know something about, counsel may be seated, that you know something about the case, and also you want to speak to me about a hardship. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to start with the knowledge of the case. Do you believe you know something about the case based on what you have read or seen in the news?
That's the only thing that I know is what I've seen or read in the news.
In the news, okay. So that's the basis of your knowledge, okay. Have you seen or read anything recently, or was this in the past, or both?
Both.
Okay. Before I get to specifically what you may have read or seen, based on what you read or seen in the news, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No, not at all.
No conclusions, okay. Do you have any opinions about the case based on what you have read or seen?
No, not at all.
Do you have any preconceived notions about the case based on what you may have read or seen?
No.
Okay. Let me talk to you about specifically what you recall either reading or seeing. You indicated you've recently either seen something or read something, or in the past you have. Tell me specifically what you recall. We'll start with seeing on the television. What do you recall, if anything, seeing about the case on television?
I mostly just look through headlines, like highlights. I don't really spend much time looking at details. It's more like entertainment to me than anything. So.
Okay. Can you recall any specifics at all about what you may have seen? Any videos, anything?
No, I just remember recognizing the defendant.
Okay, so you believe you saw the defendant's face, Ms. Dippolito's face on television?
Yes.
Okay. But in terms of what you actually saw on television, do you recall any of the details at all? Okay. How about what you read? Do you recall anything about what you may have read about the case, either recently or in the past?
More opinions than anything, other people's opinions, and it's like more like talking heads, and I'm listening to the news, so I don't really put much merit into that sort of information.
Okay. What do you recall specifically, any opinions that you may have read?
There's always people picking sides, I guess, so maybe just whether or not there's a trial. I think I originally saw it when there was something going on earlier, some time ago. And
Earlier this year or earlier?
I can't recall when that was, but I know I heard about the case sometime earlier. And
All right.
then the more specifics was whether or not it was coming back to trial, or whether there's going to be jury selections or that such.
Okay. And you said in terms of what you're reading, was basically people giving opinions. Did you concur with any of those opinions, or just note that there were opinions out there?
Just noted that it's just like blogging. I don't really pay too much attention to other people. I make up my own mind about things.
Okay. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just going back to conclusions, opinions, or preconceived notions, is it accurate to say you've not reached any opinions or conclusions about this case yourself yet?
That's accurate.
Okay. Now, if you were chosen to sit on this jury, and I realize you want to speak to me about a hardship, which I'll do in just a minute, but if you were selected for jury service in this case, you'd be required to decide this case based on the evidence and only the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law that I instruct you on. In other words, anything you may have said or read or seen concerning this case, you have to set all that aside. You have to decide the case not on that, but based on what you hear and see in the courtroom. That is the evidence. Would you be able to do that?
I believe I would be.
Okay. When you say I believe, there's just a bit of ambiguity. I don't mean to press you on that or play semantics with you, but could you do that?
It's difficult sometimes, but I would have to do so if I was called upon.
Okay. When you say difficult, I don't mean to pick on you, but I need to know a little bit more about that. It would be difficult to do.
I tend to be a little judgmental.
Okay.
So, I don't know if I could be fair or not.
Well, that's the question. That's really the ultimate question, as to whether or not you can be fair and impartial in this case, or whether coming into the case there's something, whether it's what you read, what you heard, or anything else, which is going to prevent you from being fair and impartial. Because that's what we require of our jurors, fair and impartial. And so is there something that gives you pause or concern about whether you could be fair and impartial in this case?
Not in this case.
Not in this case. Okay. Now, you did mention that you want to speak to me also about a hardship. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, I'm the sole provider for my family, and I'm also self-employed, so each hour and day that I'm missing time that I need to make money for my family.
Okay. What do you do for a living?
I'm a landscape architect.
a landscape architect. Do you work in a firm or do you work on your own?
I work on my own, so each time I finish a job, I gotta go find another one, then go collect the money.
Okay, and is there anyone, do you work with anyone or is it just you?
I work on my own for others, so I have to get the work each time, so I don't have anyone to take over.
So it's like an independent contractor situation?
That's exactly what
Okay, so you're an independent contractor, you rely upon others in the industry, you contract with them, they pay you. And so if you don't work, then you don't get paid.
That's right.
Okay, well, it's true of most of us actually, but in your case, you don't get paid for any time that you'd be off. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Like yesterday and today.
Okay. May sound like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you're required to be here for, you've already been here 2 days now, if you're required to be here all next week, 5 days, perhaps a couple of days the following week, so a total of 6 to 7 days, is that going to create a significant financial hardship for you?
In this case, yes, because I didn't already have work lined up. Sometimes I have work that can carry over, and then I can make it up on my own time.
All right, so this would be a financial hardship
Yes,
for you
it
then?
would be.
Okay.
In this case.
All right, based on financial hardship, I'm going to release you at this time from jury service in the case. You're not going to need to come back on Monday. You're released. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn that juror badge in. Please don't discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Juror entering, 5-8.
Mr. Trotta, if you could just come forward and use that standing mic right there. Counsel, you may be seated. All right, Mr. Trotta, you indicated that you thought you knew something about the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that based on things that you may have seen or read in the news?
Yes.
Okay. Was that recently, in the past, or both?
In the past.
In the past. Have you read or seen anything recently about the case?
No.
Okay. Before I get to what you actually have seen or read, I want to ask just a couple of questions. Based on what you have seen or read in the news about this case, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No.
Okay, no conclusions. Have you formulated any opinions about the case?
Possibly.
Okay, let's talk about that. Possibly means that there is potentially an opinion that you hold based on something you've already read or seen about the case. So what possible opinion do you have about the case?
Well, that from what I've seen in the initial news and also on the cop show, that there's potential for this to be true.
Okay, well, there's always potential, but I want to make sure I understand what your feelings are on that. Have you reached any, based on what you have, when you mentioned, did you see the cop show?
Yeah.
Okay.
A while back.
Okay, so you actually, in addition to, so I'm clear about this, in addition to seeing and reading things in the news, you actually also viewed a while back the cop show that featured what you believe to be this case?
Yes.
Okay. So really, here's the bottom line question. Going into the case, before you hear any evidence, based on what you have seen, heard in the news or on the television show Cops, have you reached any opinions or do you have any preconceived notions at this time concerning the guilt or innocence of Mr. Dippolito?
No.
So you've not reached any conclusions or opinions about her guilt or innocence? Okay, so let me kind of back up, back to your possible conclusions that maybe something had happened. Tell me what you really have concluded, if anything, about this case based on what you've read or seen.
I can't say I've concluded anything. It just, when you see the information and you've seen it, and you certainly think about both sides of the case. So I don't really have a conclusion, but it certainly makes you consider the possibilities of both sides.
Okay. Let me ask the question this way, just to make sure I understand. You've not reached any conclusions, opinions, or don't have any preconceived notions about guilt or innocence at this time. Based on what you've seen, heard, or read, do you have any particular leanings going into the case about what you think about the case? Are
No.
you leaning one way or the other? Okay, now, if you were selected for jury service in this case, what you would be required to do would be to set aside everything that you may have seen, read, or heard outside of this courtroom. You have to disregard all of that, and you have to decide this case based solely on the evidence that's presented here. Not what's presented on a television show, not what's presented in the news, but what's presented here in terms of evidence, and you have to follow the legal instructions that I gave you. Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk specifically. You've told me you saw the television show Cops. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, in addition to that, have you viewed any videos other than what was contained on the show Cops on the news?
No videos, only what the original broadcasts were when this came up.
Right, tell me about those broadcasts. What did you see?
Just the information that was presented about what occurred, or what potentially occurred, allegedly occurred, just the general news that was brought about the case. I can't recall specifically.
Okay, and so that was when the event initially occurred?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, have you kept track, or do you know anything about what's happened with the case since that time until now?
No.
Okay. And with respect to the TV show Cops, you mentioned you also viewed that. Do you recall any specifics from that in terms of what was shown, Ms. Dippolito, videotapes, anything that was shown on that show? Do you recall or recollect anything?
I recall watching it, and what they actually showed were the circumstances of the case in that show, yes. I don't have anything that I recall specifically or accurately.
Okay, and if things that were shown on that show, for example, are not evidence in this case, are you going to allow that to influence your decision in this case, or can you decide the case based on the evidence?
Could you repeat that?
Sure, it was a little confusing. What I'm saying is that, as I mentioned before, the evidence is the evidence. You have to decide the case based on the evidence that's presented here, not on what was presented on Cops, not what was presented in the news, not on any commentary that was contained in the show Cops or commentary that was contained in the news. You have to decide the case based on the evidence, setting all of that aside. What may be presented in evidence may be different from perhaps what you viewed on Cops or someplace else. And the bottom line question becomes, are you going to be able to set all that aside and decide the case only on what you see in this courtroom, not on what may have been reported on a news show or on a television show?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let the attorneys ask a couple follow-up questions. Any from the state? Mr. Claypool? At your side, yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
Very well.
Very good. You said that after you watched the Cops episode, you felt some kind of, you felt that it was, you felt something for both sides. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I think you have to look at everything very even keel. There's always two sides to an argument. Information can present itself that looks plausible on one side, but then there's other considerations to make about various details.
Did you see anything in the Cops episode that led you to believe in your mind that it's quite possible that Ms. Dippolito was guilty of the crime?
No.
Nothing.
Not that I can recall. It's been a while.
Have you heard any rumors about whether Ms. Dippolito was guilty of this crime?
No.
Do you remember whether discuss the outcome of Ms. Dippolito's case?
I don't recall, I don't believe so, I don't recall 100%. Thank you.
All right, counsel. All right. At this time, Ms. Trout, I'm going to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30. You'll report downstairs to the jury assembly room where you started. They'll tell you when to come up. Please remember those instructions that I gave. No communications about the case, no research concerning the case, and do not listen to or read any news accounts of the trial. And so with that said, we'll see you back here Monday.
Thank you.
You're entering 5-9.
Ms. Kaplan, counsel may be seated. I think you indicated that you may know something about the case, but you also wanted to speak to me about a hardship. Is that right, Ms. Kaplan? Okay.
Yes.
Let's start with what you know about the case, and let me ask this question. Do you believe you know something about this case based on things you may have seen or read in the news?
Yes.
Okay. Was that in the past or recently or both?
It was recently. It was in the paper, and I just, I'm familiar with the gist of it.
Okay, so did you see anything on the news about the case?
On the news itself, no.
Okay, so your source is the paper then?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And that was recently, within the last couple weeks?
Yes.
Okay. Before that, do you recall reading or seeing anything about the case?
I do, but it was a while ago.
Okay. Do you recall whether that was, again, in the paper or was something you viewed on television?
I think it was on TV.
On TV. So you may have seen something in the past on TV, and you read something relatively recently in the paper?
Correct.
All right. Now, based on either what you read or what you saw, have you reached any conclusions about this case?
I wouldn't say conclusions, but I thought some of the issues around it were a little odd to me and stuck in my mind.
Okay, well, let's kind of follow up on that a little bit if we could. Tell me what you mean by that. What were you, if it's not a conclusion, did you have an opinion about the case? Did you come to some preconceived notions about the case based on what you saw?
I guess I know that there's one aspect of the case allegedly that the defendant might have been acting and that there was something involving reality TV. And I'm not really a fan of reality TV, and so my disdain for that is something that kind of concerns me a little bit.
Okay, let me talk to you about that concern. The question becomes, is that concern or disdain that you have for reality TV something that is going to affect your ability to be fair and impartial in this case?
I mean, I'd like to think that it won't, but I can't be sure.
Okay, so is there a reasonable doubt in your mind about whether you could be fair and impartial in this case based on those notions?
I think so.
Okay. All right, ma'am, we're going to go ahead and release you for jury service in this case. You will not have to come back on Monday. All you have to do is go downstairs, first floor, turn that juror badge in where you started. Please do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Okay, thank you.
You're entering 6-1.
I think it's Ms. Drozdowski. I'm not sure I got that correct, but ma'am, you can come forward to this microphone right here. Counsel, you may be seated. Ma'am, I believe you indicated you thought you might know something about the case. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that based on things that you may have seen or read in the news?
Seen in the news.
Seen in the news. So by seen, you mean on television?
On television, yes.
Okay. Was that recently, in the past, or both?
Probably back in 2009.
Okay, in 2009. Since 2009, have you seen anything about the case?
No.
Okay, so you've not seen anything recently on the news or read anything recently about the case, is that right?
The only thing that I saw was that they were choosing a jury.
Okay, you saw that recently then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, based on what you saw back in 2009, or anything that you may have seen or read about choosing a jury in this case, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No.
Do you have any, based on what you've read or heard or seen, have you reached any opinions about the case?
No.
Do you have any at this point, based on what you read or you saw or you heard, any preconceived notions about the case?
No.
Okay. Based on what you have read or heard, do you have any opinions, feelings, beliefs, or have you reached any conclusions concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
I have no idea whether she's guilty or innocent.
Okay, so am I correct that you've not reached any conclusions about that? Okay. Can you tell me, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, can you go back to 2000, you said you saw something in 2009 about the case. Can you tell me what you recall seeing?
I recall that she was arrested. I recall that, I think it was the scene where the officers told her husband had passed and that she cried.
Okay. And so that's what you recall from what you saw back in 2009?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you saw that scene, did it cause you to reach any conclusions or reach any opinions about the case?
No.
Okay. Did you have any particular thoughts one way or the other about the case based on what you saw?
No.
All right. Since 2009, I'm going to deal with the selection of the jury, what you read, in just a couple of minutes. Did you follow the case after 2009 to know anything about the progress of the case or what was happening in the case?
No, I didn't follow the case in 2009 other than what I saw on TV.
Right, and going forward from 2009 until now, obviously in the last couple of days, you've indicated you read that the jury was going to be selected in the case, correct?
I actually heard it on TV.
You heard on TV, okay, so that was on TV. All right, so we'll talk about that in just a minute, but before I come back to that, just kind of doing with the time frame from 2009 to the last couple of weeks when you may have seen, or last couple of days, I don't know exactly when you saw something additional. Did you see anything at all or track in any way the progress of the case?
No, I did not.
All right. Now, in seeing what you saw recently on TV about jury selection, the case going back, and we're going to have a jury selection in the case, do you recall anything specific about what you saw or heard about the case?
The only thing that I heard was that they were going to choose a jury. A jury selection was going to begin. That's it.
That's it. That's all you recall?
That's the extent of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just a headline.
Okay. Now, if you're selected for jury service in this case, your duty as a juror will be to decide this case based on the evidence and only the evidence that's presented in the courtroom, following the law that I instruct you on. And what that would mean is that you would have to set aside anything you may have seen or heard in the past and decide the case based solely on the evidence. Can you do that?
I believe so.
Okay. When you say I believe, I don't mean to pick on your response. There's a little bit of ambiguity in that when you say I believe. Can you do it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to give the attorneys an opportunity to ask you some questions. State? Okay, Mr. Claypool?
Good afternoon, ma'am. You mentioned seeing something recently on TV about jury selection.
Yeah, they just mentioned that they were going to start jury selection.
Okay, now in that TV piece, did the local reporter discuss the history of Dalia Dippolito's case?
No.
I've seen a couple of broadcasts
No,
recently.
no, I...
Didn't say anything about the history? Just
No,
said
no.
jury selection, that's it.
I didn't listen to the whole thing. It was like a snippet. I don't watch the news all that often.
You said you saw a TV clip of Ms. Dippolito. So tell me everything you've seen on TV about Ms. Dippolito.
Okay, I guess from the beginning, I don't know what the date, other than the judge telling us it was 2009. I don't remember the exact date, just summer 2009.
Okay.
That she was arrested, or actually, what I saw was, I guess the police officers were around the residence. She came back from the gym, and they told her husband had passed, and she just started crying.
And not to be difficult with you, I'm trying not to do that. When I first saw that clip, I had a reaction in my body. I felt something when I saw it. Did you feel anything when you saw that video clip?
I kind of felt sad. It was,
What did you feel sad about?
well, the fact that her husband was dead.
So you thought her husband had been killed?
Right.
Did you feel when you saw that video clip that Ms. Dippolito was in some way responsible?
I had no idea.
Or did you feel anything about that, one way or the other?
No.
You just were completely neutral about it?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know the facts. I still don't know the facts.
Well, did you understand why the police officer was calling Ms. Dippolito from the gym?
I didn't know he called her from the gym. I just saw her.
Well, I thought you just said-
What I said was that she came home from the gym. She was obviously in gym clothing, with a hat, gym attire, and I didn't hear what they said to her. It was just a film, and I assume, obviously, that because that's what they said, that her husband was killed. I don't watch the news stories. Sorry.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am, at this point, we're going to ask you to come back on Monday. You'll need to be here at 9:30. What you do is you go to the first floor where you started this morning, and they'll tell you when to come up. I'll just remind you, please do not communicate with anyone about the case. Please do not do any research with respect to the case, and please do not listen to or read any news accounts of the trial. Have a pleasant weekend. We'll see you at 9:30 on Monday.
Thank you very much.
You're entering 6-2.
So Kennedy, if you could just walk forward to that microphone right there, and counsel, you may be seated. Mr. Kennedy, you indicated, I believe you thought you knew something about the case. Is that correct?
I just saw news coverage.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. You saw news coverage recently or in the past?
In the past.
In the past. Have you seen anything recently about it? Okay. When I say past, obviously that leaves a lot of room. How long ago do you think you saw something about
I
it?
imagine it was when it happened, because it was on just regular news at night.
So back in 2009, something like that?
I imagine, yeah. And I was living here in West Palm, so it would be the local news.
Okay, so on local news, so you think you saw it on the television? Okay. Since then, have you read or seen anything about the case?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Before I get to what you saw back in 2009, based on what you did see, have you reached any opinions or conclusions about the case?
No.
Do you have any preconceived notions about the case?
I don't know that I've thought about it enough to...
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that there's, based on what you saw,
No.
whether there's, for example, here's the ultimate question, the bottom line question becomes, based on what you saw on the news, have you reached any conclusions? Do you have any opinions or any preconceived notions concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
No.
All right. Now, if you're chosen for jury service in this case, what you're going to be required to do is to set aside anything you may have heard or seen in the news, decide the case based solely on the evidence presented in this courtroom, the law that I instruct you on. Are you able to do that?
Yes.
All right. Now let me talk specifically about what you can recall seeing in the past about this case? First, you said you believe it was on television. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recall reading anything about the case in the paper?
I do read the Post, and I may have read something, but I do not remember.
Okay, you may have read something, but you definitely saw something. Is that right, on the
Correct.
television? Okay. Tell me what you recall seeing.
Just the newscasters talking about it, and that there was some sort of video that was played along with it that I believe the police produced.
Okay, do you recall any specifics with regard to the video? Recall what that video showed?
Just basically, maybe it was some sort of staged event.
Okay, and when you
And the
said...
reaction.
Okay, staged event and reaction. Was Ms. Dippolito in the video?
I do not know.
Okay, do you remember anything else specifically about that video at this point? Okay. Have you seen that video again since that time?
No.
All right.
And I might have saw it 2 or 3 different times on the news at that time.
At that
'Cause it was,
time.
in different news channels,
But
but
even
not
though-
since then.
Okay, but not since then. But even though you saw it a couple of times at the time, you don't really recall any specifics about it right now, in terms of...
Not other than what I just said.
Other than what I just said, okay. All right, and you said you may have read something in the Post about the case, is that right?
It's possible, because I do read the Post almost daily, but I do not remember reading an article about it. But
You
I'm
do not
sure
recall-
there was one.
Okay, but you don't recall reading any articles about the case? All right. Since you first saw about the information about the case back when the alleged events occurred, when you were describing those videos for us, have you tracked the case at all since then? Do you know what's happened with the case since that time?
No.
Okay. I'm going to let the attorneys ask a few questions. State. Mr. Claypool.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Kennedy. Did you recognize any lawyers in the case?
I'm an attorney, and I think I've probably seen all of you at either a legal aid society or maybe a bar event, or maybe even in this building. But I'm a tax attorney.
Have you seen any of the lawyers on any television clips?
No.
Did you read the Palm Beach Post newspaper this morning?
No.
Did you read it yesterday morning?
No, I came straight here.
When's the last time you read the Post?
Probably Tuesday in the afternoon, online.
Do you recall reading anything online about the Dippolito
No.
case? You mentioned too that you had 2 or 3 times you said you had read news articles. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't know that I ever read a news article. I know that I read the Post, and I'm sure they had an article, and maybe I did, but I can't recall that. I remember seeing the news at night on television.
And tell me, what was the video you saw?
My recollection is that there was some sort of staged event.
Staged event?
Yes, that in thinking about it, that it was the police who staged the event, and I remember seeing that, but I can't recall exactly what was going on in that, other than that it was a staged event.
Was Ms. Dippolito in the staged event?
I think she was,
And do you recall?
but I don't recall seeing her. Like I barely recognize her, but I do recognize her a little.
And part of the reason why I'm asking these questions, and I apologize if you feel like I'm confronting you, is we're trying to get a level playing field for the trial. We want to have jurors that are fair and open-minded and not coming in with any bias, either in favor of the state or my client as well. That's why I'm asking these questions. And with that said, when you saw this video, this staged crime scene, and you saw Ms. Dippolito in that scene, did that evoke any type of feeling or a thought in your mind that she may have done something wrong?
I don't know that. I think just being a lawyer, I have a healthy skepticism of everything. And so, if anything, it was the opposite. Yeah, if anything, it was the opposite.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy, we're going to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30, a report to the jury assembly room. They'll tell you when to come up. Just a reminder, please do not communicate with anyone about the case, do not do any research about the case, and please do not listen to or read any news accounts of the trial. Have a pleasant weekend. We'll see you back Monday.
You're entering 6-3.
Ms. Sanchez, if you could just walk right up to that microphone. Counsel, you may be seated. Ms. Sanchez, I believe you indicated that you knew something about the case. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and is that based on things you may have seen or read in the news?
Just seen.
Seen.
briefly.
So on television?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And and was that recently or in the past, or
No,
both?
in the past.
In the past. Have you seen anything recently in the last week or so about the case?
No, sir.
All right. But in the past you have, is that correct? And when we say past, can we define that a bit? How long ago?
Sure. When the defendant was taken into custody, I just briefly saw it then, so nothing more than the facts that you laid out.
Okay, so that would have been back, to the best of your knowledge, back in 2009?
Correct.
Okay. Have you followed the case since then?
No, sir.
You have any idea what happened to the case since then?
No.
Okay. Do you have any preconceived notions about the case based on what you saw?
No, sir.
Okay. Have you reached any conclusions about the case based on what you saw?
No, sir.
Do you have any opinions about the case based on what you saw?
No.
Now, kind of repeating those questions in a little bit different format, based on what you either saw or read about the case, do you have any opinions, viewpoints, reached any conclusions at all, one way or the other, concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
No, sir.
All right. If you were selected for jury service in this case, you would be required to set aside anything you may have seen or heard in the past about this case. You have to decide the case based on the evidence and only the evidence that was presented in this courtroom following the law that I instruct you on. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Can you tell me specifically what you recall? You said you saw something on the television. Did you also read something or just see something?
No, I just saw something.
Okay.
TV in the background as I'm getting ready for work, and just saw it, and that was it.
Okay. Can you recall any specifics about what you did see?
Just with her in handcuffs and the cops, and that was it.
With her in handcuffs?
Yes,
and
being
that
taken away. Yeah, that's the only thing that I saw on television.
Did you see anything else other than that?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, when you did see her being taken away in handcuffs, I mean, you would conclude she had been arrested.
Correct.
Did that cause you to reach any conclusions or opinions about whether, in fact, she was guilty or innocent of anything?
No, I just went about my business.
Okay. You just saw that she was arrested and you
Correct.
didn't reach any conclusions. Did it affect you in any way when you saw that?
No.
Okay. Let me turn it over to the attorneys. Do you have some questions from the state? Mr. Claypool?
No.
Okay. All right. Ms. Sanchez, we're going to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30 for continuation of jury selection.
Okay.
When you come back, what I want you to do is just go to the at 9:30, report to the jury assembly room. They'll tell you when to come up. Remind you, do not communicate about the case with anyone. Do not do any research about the case, and please do not in any way listen to or read any news accounts of the trial.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you back on Monday. Have a
Thank
pleasant
you.
weekend.
You're entering 6-4.
Mr. Westerfeld, if you just come right up to that microphone for me, please. Counsel may be seated. I think you indicated to us that you may know something about the case. Is that right?
Yes, previously from the coverage.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Is that based on things you may have seen or read in the news?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was that recently, within the last week or so, or also in the past?
No, in the past.
In the past. And kind of define that for me. How long ago in the past?
5 years ago.
Okay.
During the original.
Okay, at or
situation.
about the time you believe of the alleged events?
I'm sorry, sir?
At or about the time of the alleged events?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And since then, have you followed the case at all? Do you know what happened to the case since then?
A little bit, I guess, the original verdict, but nothing since then.
That's what I want to know. Okay. All right, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and excuse you from jury service in this case. You will not have to come back on Monday. Just turn your juror badge in downstairs, and you are excused. Please do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
Juror entering 6-5.
Ms. Cartel, is that right? Gartel. Not with a C, with a G, right? Okay. I apologize. Counsel, you may be seated. I believe you indicated that you knew something about the case, and also you want to speak to me about a hardship. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's start with your knowledge of the case. My question is, do you know something about the case through things you may have seen or read in the news?
Yes.
All right. Was that recently or in the past?
In the past.
Okay, and could you define for me in the past? About how long ago?
Well, when it was first happening, I was watching the news when the arrest was first going on and the situation was on television, and then when the trial was happening. So I followed the news and watched the news.
Okay. All right, thank you, ma'am. We're going to go ahead and excuse you from jury service in this case. You will not need to come back on Monday. Appreciate you being here. You can go down to the first floor, turn that juror badge in, and just please don't discuss anything about the case with anyone on the way out.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Juror entering 6-6.
Miller, if you can, Ms. Miller, if you can just come to that microphone, counsel, you may be seated. I believe you did not raise your hand about having any knowledge of the case, but you did want to talk to me about a hardship. Is that right?
I did.
Okay, and can you tell me about your hardship, please?
I am front office manager / coordinator for a doctor who is primarily dealing with late stage and end stage cancers. And our office runs really mean and lean, meaning that there aren't very many of us. The problem is that my assistant leaves on a flight to Las Vegas on Monday. There is nobody that knows what I do, and so.
How large is the office? How many people work there?
2 nurses, 1 office manager, 1 patient coordinator, and my assistant, myself.
Okay, and you're the front office manager?
Correct.
Okay.
There's a practice manager, there's a patient care coordinator, the doctor, 2 nurses.
And so in terms of what you do, when you say front office manager, are you involved in patient care, or do you deal with other issues?
No patient care, but all of the insurances, the billing, the scheduling, the contacting, those sorts of things.
Are you paid for the time that you're on jury duty from your office, from work?
Yes. Right now I am. I don't know what would happen if I'm selected. I'm not sure.
All right, so you're not sure what their policy is with
I
respect
don't
to
know.
payment? Okay. All right. Ma'am, at this time, I'm going to have to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30. I can't excuse you at this time. If you have any concerns about the firm's policies with respect to payment, you could obviously check those out and let me know. But at this time, I'm going to need to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30 for continuation of jury selection. Between now and then, if you can remember those instructions I gave to you, please do not discuss the case with anyone. Please do not do any research, and please do not read or listen to any news accounts of the trial. When you come back on Monday at 9:30, what you do is you go to the jury assembly room on the first floor where you started. They'll tell you when to come up, okay? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Juror entering 6-7.
Mr. Dalby, if you could come up to that microphone right there, and counsel, you may be seated. Ma'am, I think you had indicated that you believe you know something about the case. Is that right?
It is.
Okay. Is that based on things that you have either read or seen in the news?
The news.
All right. And before getting into any specifics, was that something that you've read or seen recently, in the past, or both?
No, Your Honor, only in the past.
In the past.
A long time ago.
When we talk about a long time ago, I mentioned in the statement that I read to you, the allegations stem back to 2009. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I don't know, I don't remember exactly if it was 2009, but I know it was several years ago.
Several years ago, all right. Now, several years ago, when you did hear about the case, was it on television, or did you read something, or both?
I just remember, I don't think it was on TV. I think I read something.
All right, so you read something in the paper, perhaps?
Probably, yes.
All right. Since 2009 to now, have you kept track of the progress of the case or anything that's been happening in the case?
No, sir. I haven't.
All right.
I didn't even know. I've not thought of it since.
Okay. Based on what you read back in 2009 or whatever period of time it was in the past, you think it was a few years ago, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
No, sir.
Have you reached any opinions about the case based on what you've read?
Opinions? No.
Do you have any preconceived notions about the case based on what you've read?
Honestly, no.
All right. Based on what you have read, or for that matter, if you believe you've heard anything about the case, have you reached any conclusions? Do you have any opinions or preconceived notions concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
No, sir.
All right. If you were selected for jury service in this case, what you'd be required to do would be to decide the case based on the evidence and only the evidence that's presented here in this courtroom following the law that I instruct you on. You would have to set aside anything you may have read or heard in the past. Can you do that?
I understand. Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you recall specifically what you read about the case when you did read about the case?
I do.
Okay. What did you read about the case?
Only that, and I hesitated to even raise my hand because I'm not even sure this is the same case, but it just sounded similar that a wife was accused of attempting to hire a hit on her husband, and that it was a police officer was involved, and that after the fact the police or someone, it was like a sting, and that they told the wife that the husband had in fact deceased, but he had not.
Okay, and this is something you read, not saw on television?
No, I didn't see it on TV. I'm not sure if I read it in a paper or maybe online, but I didn't see anything on TV.
You didn't see anything on TV, okay. And again, when you saw, well, not saw, when you read about the case, did it lead you to reach any conclusions one way or another about the case?
No conclusions about guilt or innocence or anything like that.
Okay. Any other things that came to mind when you did read the case? Any opinions that were created from reading it? Just any thoughts
No,
at
just
all?
that it was interesting and pretty amazing story. That's all.
Okay. But in terms of whether the story was true, not true, any conclusions about guilt or innocence,
No,
you did not reach any
I
opinions?
hardly ever believe anything that I read, and hardly any of even what I see.
Okay. I'm going to allow the attorneys to ask you a few questions. State.
And you said that it was interesting and amazing.
Well, just the irony of it, and kind of fantastical, I guess, like almost unbelievable, I guess, that something like that would actually happen, and that it would be in South Florida.
Okay, so when having those thoughts, thinking what you just said, did that cause you to think that maybe it is true, maybe it's not true?
Not really. I just really didn't know, and I still don't know. I don't really know. I don't really believe much of what I read.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Claypool.
I think, Your Honor, good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
Just have a couple questions. It seemed like you hesitated just a little bit when His Honor asked you whether seeing or reading this article had any effect on whether Ms. Dippolito was innocent or guilty. May I ask you why you might have hesitated a little bit?
Yes, only because I'm a teacher and I teach small children, first graders, and as Your Honor said, I am actually concerned about them being away from me for that long and losing instruction from me.
No, I think let me just make sure I understand. You work for the Palm Beach County School System or
Yes,
private
sir.
school? You work for the Palm Beach County School System. You're one of those underpaid and underappreciated civil servants, right?
Absolutely, thank
You
you.
are. When my wife worked, she was a teacher many years ago, so I can appreciate that. No, I use that teacher example a lot on hardship because when teachers tell me that, I don't disregard that. I believe that when they tell me they're very dedicated to their students. Unfortunately, it just doesn't rise to that level of extreme inconvenience when we have other people who don't get paid, don't have substitutes, et cetera. And so I have historically and must always deny those types of hardships. But I do appreciate that service and understand your concern.
Thanks.
Just one last question, and thank you for your honesty, by the way. When you read about somebody getting arrested, do you believe that in your mind that they're probably guilty?
Absolutely not.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
All right, ma'am. We're going to ask you to come back on Monday at 9:30 for continuation of jury selection. By the end of the day, we're hoping you're going to know one way or the other whether you're going to need to be here or not. But I do need to ask you to come back. Counts of this case.
I understand.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll see you. Have a pleasant weekend. We'll see you on
Go
Monday.
now.
You can leave now. You don't have to hang around now. You just come back on Monday.
You're entering 6A.
Mr. Connick, if you just come up to the microphone, counsel, you may be seated. I believe you indicated both that you knew something about the case or believe you knew something about the case and also you had a hardship you wanted to discuss with me. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. The
Okay.
hardship I managed to eliminate, so.
Oh, I appreciate that. So you worked on that for me. Okay, so really all I have to do is talk to you about your knowledge of the case.
Correct.
Okay, great. Do you think you know something about the case based on what you have read or heard in the news?
Yes, back when it happened, yes.
When it happened, okay. And from your recollection, how far back was that?
I think it was around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
I do remember there was a trial, maybe a year after, and there was a mistrial. and
Okay. All right, thank you. What we're going to do is, even though you're not asking me for hardship, we're going to release you from jury service in this case. You're not going to have to come back on Monday. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn that juror badge in, and you're released. Please do not discuss anything with the other potential jurors in the case. Have a good weekend.
okay, thank you, Chair. Bye.
Juror entering 6-9.
Ms. Goldfarb, if you could just come up to that microphone right there, and counsel, you may be seated.
Hello?
Okay, good afternoon. I believe you raised your hand about knowing something about the case, but you also wanted to speak to me about a hardship. Is that correct? Okay, we're going to start with what you may know about the case. Let me ask the question this way. Do you believe you know something about the case based on matters which you may have read or seen in the news?
Yes?
Yes, okay. Was it recently or in the past?
In the past.
In the past. And just kind of define past for me. How long ago?
I don't know, 4 years ago?
4 years ago or so? Okay. And 4 years ago, or whenever it was, in other words, a number of years ago, not this year, is that right?
Right.
Okay, so nothing recently, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. With regard to what you heard or saw about the case in the past, did you see something on television? Did you read something in the news, or both?
Both.
Both, okay. Now, before I get to what you actually read or what you actually saw, based on what you did read or see, have you reached any conclusions about the case?
I would like to think I have an open mind, but I mean, I am tending to make it, I mean, I pretty much decided.
Well, that's what we need to know. I mean, people are reluctant to tell us that because I think they're telling us something bad.
Right.
You're telling us how you feel, and that's all we want, is how you honestly feel. So let me make sure I know how you honestly feel before we go any further. What I'm hearing you say, and I have this wrong, you tell me, what I'm hearing you say is you have already reached some conclusions, opinions, or beliefs about the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito based on what you read or heard in the past.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you, ma'am. That's all we need is that kind of honesty. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and release you from jury service in this case. You will not be required to come back on Monday. All you have to do is go downstairs, turn in your juror badge. Please do not discuss anything with the other potential jurors on the way out.
Okay, thank you.
Juror entering 6-10.
I think I'm going to mispronounce your name. Is Ms. Simper? Simpier, okay. Ms. Simpier, welcome. You can stand next to that mic. Counsel, you may be seated. I believe you raised your hand about knowledge of the case, but you also want to talk about a hardship. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, we're going to start with the knowledge. Do you believe that you know something about this case based on something you may have read or seen in the news?
Yep, conversation I had in the past about the case. Mm-hmm.
Okay, a conversation, okay. In addition to the conversation, I'll find out about that in just a minute. Have you seen anything on the news about the case?
Just an article or two in the past year.
Okay. So you've seen some articles in the past year. Have you viewed any videos online, like on television, anything about the case on television?
No.
All right. So what you've done is you've seen some articles in the past year, and you've had some conversations about the case with others. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Let me ask kind of a few questions about that before we go any further. Based on what you've read or the conversations that you've had with others about the case, have you at this point reached any conclusions about the case?
No.
Do you have, again, based on conversations you've had or things that you may have read, do you have any opinions about the case at this point?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me about your opinion about the case based on what you have read and what you have discussed with others.
Well, I'm married and have a family. And, pretty obvious, right? I don't think in any situation hiring a hitman is acceptable. It's just a non-starter.
Okay. All right, ma'am, we're going to go ahead and discharge you from jury service in this case. You will not need to come back on Monday. All you need to do is turn that juror badge in downstairs on the first floor where you started. Please do not discuss anything with the other potential jurors on the way out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What's up?
I hope so for everybody.
Well, that's like somebody saying they don't think robberies, they're against robbery. Well, of course, but that's not the issue. The question is the person committed the robbery?
Juror entering 7-1.
Ms. Backman, if you just come forward to that microphone for me, please. Counsel, you may be seated. I think you indicated that you believe you may know something about the case. Is that right?
I heard the night before we were to report that they were doing a jury selection again, and then I recall several years ago hearing some news clips.
Okay, a couple things there. You said you heard that they were going to select a jury again. What did you mean by that?
I don't really remember. I was cooking, so I wasn't really paying attention. And they said something on the news that they were calling for a jury. But I remember this had happened a long time ago.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I thought they said, and I'm not really sure, because I don't want to, say something that I'm positive about something, but I thought they said that this was a retrial,
Okay,
and maybe
that's
I
what
misunstood.
I wasn't clear on what you were saying.
Okay.
Okay, so I counsel. Okay.
And I do remember hearing it in the news a long time ago.
Okay.
But I don't really recall much about it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We're going to release you from jury service in this case. You will not have to come back on Monday. Simply go to the first floor, turn that juror badge in.
Okay.
Please don't discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
All right, thank you.
Juror entering 7-2.
Read. Okay, counsel may be seated. Mr. Reed, I believe you indicated that you knew something or thought you knew something about this case and perhaps one of the attorneys. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me start with knowledge about the case. Well, first of all, which attorney do you believe you know?
This guy.
Okay.
No, I don't
You
know
recognize
him.
Mr. Rosenfeld?
Yeah, I don't know him. Just from TV.
All right, so you've seen Mr. Rosenfeld on TV?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Let's talk about your knowledge about the case for just a minute.
Okay.
Do you believe you have knowledge about the case based on things you may have seen or read in the news?
Yes,
All
just
right.
TV.
TV, okay. Have you read anything? You've just watched on TV?
Watched on TV and on YouTube. I think I saw it on Cops, and I think Cops was one, and Nightline, I think, was another one where I saw it.
Okay, so Cops?
Yes.
Nightline?
Yeah, and YouTube.
And YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you also see things on the news being reported about the case?
Yes, but it was mostly those the distinct ones were those three. I mean, I'm sure that I probably saw it in the news, but the three distinct ones were the three that I mentioned.
Okay. Before I get into the details of what you observed, having viewed the cops episode, seeing something on Nightline, YouTube, what you may have seen on the news, based on any of that or all of that, have you reached any conclusions about this case? You're hesitating. You feel like you may have to give me one answer or another. It's got to be.
No, well, yes. I mean, I hate to say it, but yes.
Well, you don't have to hate to say it, because that's all we're looking for is
I'm sorry.
answers. Yeah,
I just feel because I feel bad. I feel bad about it, but yes.
But that's okay. This is what all we ask for are truthful responses.
Okay,
so let me just kind of bottom line it for you. Based on what you've seen, have you already reached conclusions or have opinions about the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
Yeah, when I watched it, yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. And don't feel bad about it. What you should feel bad about is if you felt that way and didn't tell us.
Okay.
That's when you should feel bad, okay? Not when you tell us an honest opinion, okay? They're neither right or wrong, they're simply yours, okay?
All right, okay.
I appreciate your candor. We're going to excuse you from jury service in this case. You do not have to come back on Monday. All you have to do is go downstairs, first floor jury assembly room, turn in your badge. Please do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
After the next one? That's fine. I just need to be able to give Neil a heads up. So, okay. I'll tell him to delay bringing the next person in. Maybe we'll take a short break for comfort for everyone.
You're entering 7-3.
Well, that's not Neil anyway. Deputy, after this one, we're going to take a 5-minute break before we continue, so I just want to give you a heads up. Where is Neil? Oh, I don't see him. Okay. I'm sorry. Council may be seated. We're having our own conversation up here. Help me with your last name.
Georgiadis.
Georgiadis. I probably tried 10 times and get it right once. You indicated that you thought you knew something about the case and also that you wanted to speak to me about a hardship. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about first what you know about the case, and specifically what I want to start with is, do you believe you know something about the case based on what you have seen or read in the news?
Yes.
And was that in the past or was it recently or both?
It was both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, it's been on the news for a long time, and then recently, before I was called here, it was also on the news a lot.
Okay, and kind of let me ask you just a couple bottom line questions before we go any further. Based on what you have either read or seen about the case in the past or recently, have you reached any conclusions at all about the case?
Oh, I have myself, yeah.
Okay, what conclusion is that, please?
Well, I don't know, it just kind of makes it hard to, you become a little biased in what you formulate in your mind, I think, so.
Okay, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that you, based on what you've read or heard, you've already reached some conclusions concerning the guilt or innocence of Ms. Dippolito?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to release you from jury service in this case. You will not need to come back. All you have to do is turn your juror badge in on the first floor. Please do not discuss anything with the other jurors on the way out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Neil, did you catch we're going to take about a 5-minute break before we continue? So don't bring anybody else in for about 5 minutes. All right, why don't we take about a 5-minute comfort break, and you can run downstairs. Obviously, you know to avoid potential jurors. That's the best way to do it. Yeah, it's not your first rodeo, is it, Ms. Rose? All right, we'll be in recess for about 5 minutes.
Oh, no, because you're connected, right? You can't disconnect during the break? Because it's 5 minutes. If you disconnect and check now, that would save me a lot of time of waiting for Eric, because then after the break, I can just start editing. My back is killing me on this chair. Oh, I know.
Yeah. I thought you were going to call me. Well, I was on voicemail anyway.
It's fine. He's gonna come down in a few minutes anyway. I'm gonna go use the restroom and then go down there.
You want to do it down?
Yeah, just because I'm gonna get his back and bring it up here. This one to go all the way to the kind of what we did yesterday, the old switch room.